Don't worry, Eleanor, I handled everything while you were unconscious. The house sold for a fantastic price, and honestly, you should be thanking me. My daughter-in-law Veronica's voice rang through the hospital phone with sickening cheerfulness, as if she'd just done me the greatest favor in the world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I lay there in my hospital bed, still groggy from 12 hours of critical spinal surgery, trying to process the words that had just shattered my world. The house? My house? The Victorian manor in Willowbrook Heights that had been in my family for 4 generations? The home where I'd raised my son David, where my late husband Thomas and I had built our life together, where every room held precious memories spanning 63 years of my life? What did you just say? I whispered, my voice barely audible through the fog of anesthesia and disbelief. Oh, come on, Eleanor, don't be dramatic, Veronica continued with that condescending tone she'd perfected over the past 3 years since marrying my son. You know you can't manage that big old place anymore, especially not after this surgery. The buyers were so eager, they paid $20,000 over asking price. I deposited the money into David's account since, well, you'll obviously need full-time care now. My heart monitor began beeping faster as the full weight of her words hit me. This wasn't a nightmare brought on by the medication. This was real. While I was lying on an operating table, fighting for my life as surgeons worked to repair the crushed vertebrae from my car accident, my daughter-in-law had somehow sold my family's ancestral home without my knowledge or consent. My name is Eleanor Fairmont, and at 71 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal life could throw at me. I'd survived the death of my beloved husband 5 years ago, weathered financial difficulties, and even endured Veronica's increasingly obvious attempts to push me out of my son's life. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined. The Fairmont estate in Willowbrook Heights wasn't just a house, it was a legacy. Built in 1887 by my great-grandfather, Railroad Baron Cornelius Fairmont, it had weathered 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and countless family celebrations and sorrows. The sprawling 3-story mansion with its wraparound porches, stained glass windows, and meticulously maintained gardens had been my sanctuary, my identity, my entire world. Veronica, I managed to say, my voice growing stronger despite the pain medication coursing through my veins, that house was never yours to sell. It's been in my family for over a century. How could you possibly? Oh, please, she interrupted with a laugh that made my blood run cold. David signed all the papers. He has power of attorney, remember? We decided this was for the best while you were under. You should have seen how excited the buyers were. Some tech mogul from Silicon Valley who's going to turn it into a quote, smart home showcase, whatever that means. Honestly, Eleanor, it's time you faced reality. You're old, you're injured, and you can't take care of yourself anymore, let alone a massive house like that. Power of attorney. The words hit me like a physical blow. I remembered signing those documents 2 years ago when I'd first been diagnosed with osteoporosis, and my doctor had recommended having someone designated for emergencies. David had been so caring, so concerned about my welfare. Just in case something happens, Mom, he'd said, I want to make sure you're protected. I'd trusted him. I'd trusted them both. The buyers are already moving in their contractors, Veronica continued, oblivious to or simply not caring about the devastation in my silence. They want to gut the whole interior. Apparently, all that vintage charm you're so proud of is just outdated to normal people. They're planning to install some kind of automated everything, smart toilets, voice-controlled lighting, the works. Isn't that exciting? Gut the interior. The hand-carved mahogany staircase that Thomas had spent months restoring. The original hardwood floors that had been lovingly maintained for over a century. The vintage chandelier in the dining room that had witnessed 4 generations of family dinners. The library where I'd read bedtime stories to David. Where my father had taught me to love literature. Where Thomas and I had spent countless quiet evenings by the fireplace. All of it. Gone. Where? I swallowed hard, fighting back tears that I refused to let Veronica hear. Where am I supposed to live? Well, David and I have been talking about that, she said, and I could practically hear the smug smile in her voice. There's a lovely assisted living facility called Sunset Manor just outside town. Very affordable, especially now that we have the house money to pay for it. They have activities, meal plans, medical staff on site. Really, it's perfect for someone in your condition. Sunset Manor. I knew the place. A rundown facility on the outskirts of Millfield, 40 minutes from everything and everyone I knew, where elderly people went to wait quietly for death, forgotten by families who found them inconvenient. David agreed to this? I asked, though I already knew the answer. My son, my only child, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for after his father died, had signed away my birthright while I lay unconscious and helpless. Of course he did, Veronica replied. He's finally starting to see things clearly. You've been holding him back for years, Eleanor. He's 35 years old. It's time he stopped being your caretaker and started focusing on his own future, our future. The line went quiet except for the steady beeping of my monitors and the distant sounds of the hospital corridor. Through my window, I could see the sun setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of the sunsets I used to watch from my bedroom window at the estate. Veronica, I said finally, my voice calm despite the storm raging inside me. Yes? You have no idea what you've just done. There was a pause. What's that supposed to mean? I closed my eyes, thinking of the hidden safe behind the family portrait in the library, of the documents stored there that Veronica and David knew nothing about, of the security system my late husband had insisted on installing after a break-in attempt years ago, of the lawyer's card tucked away in my jewelry box, the one who'd helped me make certain preparations after Thomas died, when I'd first started worrying about David's financial irresponsibility and his eventual choice in wives. It means, I said softly, that you're about to learn exactly who you're dealing with. And then I hung up the phone. As I lay back against my pillows, ignoring the throbbing pain in my spine, I began to plan. Veronica and David thought they'd caught me at my weakest moment, thought they'd outsmarted a helpless old woman who would simply accept their betrayal and fade quietly into a nursing home. They had no idea that the Fairmont family hadn't built and maintained their legacy for over a century by being weak or naive. They were about to discover that while they'd been plotting against me, I'd been preparing for exactly this kind of betrayal. The game was just beginning. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning brought a parade of nurses checking my vital signs and adjusting my pain medication, but nothing could dull the ache in my heart. As I stared at the sterile white ceiling of Mercy General Hospital, memories of my beloved Fairmont estate flooded back with startling clarity. I'd been born in that house 71 years ago, in the same master bedroom where my mother had brought me into the world during a fierce October storm. The midwife had said I came into the world fighting, and perhaps that should have been my first clue about the battles that lay ahead. Growing up as Eleanor Fairmont meant something in Willowbrook Heights. Our family name was carved into the cornerstone of the public library, etched on the bronze plaque at Fairmont Park, and whispered with respect in the halls of the Historical Society. My great-grandfather Cornelius hadn't just built a house. He'd built a legacy that defined our small but prosperous community. The estate itself was a masterpiece of Victorian architecture. 15 rooms spread across 3 floors, each one telling a story of generations past. The grand foyer, with its imported Italian marble floors, had welcomed presidents, governors, and countless distinguished guests over the decades. The conservatory, where my grandmother had cultivated rare orchids, still bloomed with descendants of her original plants. The tower room, accessible only by a narrow spiral staircase, had been my secret hideaway as a child, and later became David's favorite reading spot. But it wasn't the grandeur that made the house special. It was the love that had filled every corner. I could still see Thomas on our wedding day, carrying me over the threshold, while my parents beamed from the parlor doorway. I remember David's first steps, taken across the Persian rug in the living room, while Thomas cheered, and I fumbled for the camera. Christmas mornings around the 12-foot tree in the great room, with presents spilling out from beneath its branches. Birthday parties in the garden, where 3 generations of children had played hide-and-seek among my grandmother's rose bushes. After Thomas died of a sudden heart attack 5 years ago, that house had been my lifeline. Every creaking floorboard, every familiar shadow, every photograph lining the hallways had kept his memory alive. David used to understand that. He'd visit every Sunday for dinner, sitting in his father's chair at the dining room table while I cooked his favorite pot roast in the kitchen, where 4 generations of Fairmont women had nourished their families. Everything changed when he met Veronica Fletcher at that technology conference in Denver 3 years ago. Veronica was nothing like the women David had dated before. Where his previous girlfriends had been warm and respectful, charmed by our family history and traditions, Veronica saw only dollar signs and inconvenience. She was a sleek, ambitious marketing executive with perfectly styled platinum blonde hair and a wardrobe that cost more than most people's cars. From the moment David brought her home for Sunday dinner, I could see the calculations running behind her ice blue eyes as she surveyed the antique furniture, original artwork, and irreplaceable family heirlooms. "This place is like a museum," she'd said that first night, running a manicured finger along the mantelpiece in the parlor. "David, you could sell all this old stuff and buy a beautiful modern condo in the city. Think of how much easier life would be." I had watched my son's face during that conversation, seeing the first seeds of doubt take root. Veronica had a way of making everything sound so reasonable, so practical. Why hold on to dusty old furniture when you could have sleek, contemporary pieces? Why maintain a large house when a small apartment would be more efficient? Why cling to the past when the future offered so much more convenience? The changes started small. David began skipping Sunday dinners, claiming he was too busy with work. When he did visit, Veronica would find excuses to cut the visits short. They had dinner reservations, or she had an early morning meeting, or they needed to look at apartments. Gradually, my son's weekly visits became monthly, then sporadic, then rare. When Thomas and I had established the power of attorney documents years earlier, it had been a simple precaution. We'd both designated each other, and after his death, it seemed natural to name David. He was my only child, my flesh and blood, the person I trusted most in the world. The lawyer had explained the limitations carefully. The power could only be used if I was incapacitated and unable to make decisions for myself. I'd never imagined my own son would interpret incapacitated so broadly, or that he'd use my trust as a weapon against me. The irony was crushing. I'd spent my entire life protecting that house, preserving it for future generations. During the recession of 2008, when property values plummeted and many of our neighbors lost their homes, I'd taken a reverse mortgage to maintain the estate. When the roof needed replacing after a hailstorm, I'd sold my grandmother's jewelry collection to pay for it. When the original heating system finally failed, I'd worked 3 part-time jobs at age 68 to afford the renovations. Every sacrifice had been worth it, because I believed I was saving something precious for David, for his children, for the Fairmont name. I'd imagined him bringing his wife home to the same rooms where his father and I had fallen in love. I'd dreamed of grandchildren playing in the same garden where David had learned to ride his bicycle, sleeping in the same nursery where 4 generations of Fairmont babies had been rocked to sleep. Instead, my son had sold our heritage for money he planned to spend on Veronica's lifestyle upgrades. A soft knock on my hospital room door interrupted my painful reminiscing. Dr. Martinez, my surgeon, entered with a clipboard and a cautiously optimistic expression. Good morning, Eleanor. How are you feeling today? Like someone drove a truck over my spine, I said, attempting a weak smile. But I suppose that's better than yesterday. He nodded, checking my chart. The surgery went better than we hoped. We were able to repair all 3 fractured vertebrae and relieve the pressure on your spinal cord. With proper physical therapy, you should regain full mobility within 6 to 8 weeks. Full mobility. The words should have filled me with relief, but instead, they reminded me of everything I'd lost. What good was mobility when I had nowhere to go? Veronica had made it clear that my only option was Sunset Manor, that depressing warehouse for discarded elderly people. Doctor, I said carefully, about my recovery timeline, would you say I was mentally competent during yesterday's surgery? Dr. Martinez looked puzzled. Well, you were under general anesthesia, so you were unconscious. But before the surgery, you were completely lucid and coherent. Why do you ask? Just curious about the medical definition of incapacitation, I replied, my mind already working through the implications. After he left, I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Jonathan Whitmore had been the Fairmont family attorney for over 30 years. He'd handled my parents' wills, my marriage documents, Thomas's estate, and countless other legal matters. More importantly, he'd helped me make certain preparations after Thomas died, preparations that even David knew nothing about. Jonathan, I said when he answered. It's Eleanor Fairmont. I need your help. Eleanor, I heard about your accident. How are you feeling? Angry, I said without hesitation. Very, very angry. And I need to know exactly what rights I have when someone uses power of attorney to sell my property without proper justification. There was a long pause. Eleanor, what's happened? As I told him about Veronica's phone call, about the house sale, about David's betrayal, I could hear Jonathan's intake of breath and the scratch of his pen taking notes. This is serious, Eleanor. Very serious. Power of attorney doesn't give someone carte blanche to make major decisions unless you're truly incapacitated. Being unconscious for surgery doesn't qualify. That's what I thought, I said grimly. Jonathan, remember those documents we prepared after Thomas died? The ones in the safe? Of course. Do you want me to retrieve them? Not yet, I said, a plan beginning to form in my mind. But I want you to start researching everything you can about fraudulent use of power of attorney. And Jonathan? Keep this conversation completely confidential. I don't want David or Veronica to know I've spoken to you. After I hung up, I lay back against my pillows, feeling more alert than I had since waking up from surgery. Veronica thought she'd checkmated me, thought she'd outmaneuvered a helpless old woman. David thought he'd solved his inconvenient mother problem with one signature. They had no idea that the Fairmont family had survived and thrived for over a century by being prepared for anything. And they certainly didn't know about the surprise I'd hidden away, waiting for exactly this kind of betrayal. Let them celebrate their victory for now. Let them think they'd won. Soon enough, they'd learn that Eleanor Fairmont wasn't finished playing this game. 2 days into my hospital stay, I was struggling with the physical therapy exercises when a woman in an elegant navy suit appeared in my doorway. She had auburn hair pulled back in a professional chignon and carried herself with the kind of confidence that spoke of years and high-stakes negotiations. Mrs. Fairmont. I'm Rebecca Hartley from Pinnacle Real Estate Group. I hope I'm not interrupting your recovery, but there's an urgent matter regarding your property sale that simply cannot wait. I gestured for her to enter, curious about her grave expression and the thick leather portfolio clutched in her hands. Something about her demeanor told me this wasn't a social call to check on a client's satisfaction. Please, have a seat, I said, muting the television where a mindless morning show had been playing. Though I should mention, I wasn't aware I had any property sales pending. Rebecca's eyebrows shot up as she settled into the visitor's chair. Mrs. Fairmont, according to our records, the The Fairmont estate at 1247 Elmridge Drive in Willowbrook Heights was listed and sold through our agency 3 days ago. The sale was facilitated by your daughter-in-law, Mrs. Veronica Fairmont, who presented power of attorney documentation. Veronica Fletcher, I corrected automatically. She kept her maiden name. The words tasted bitter in my mouth. Even in marriage, Veronica had refused to fully commit to becoming part of our family, yet she'd had no qualms about selling our family legacy. Rebecca opened her portfolio and spread several documents across my hospital bed table. Mrs. Fairmont, I need to ask you directly, did you authorize this sale? Absolutely not, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. I was unconscious during spinal surgery when this supposed transaction took place. The first I heard of it was when Veronica called to gloat about the sale. The color drained from Rebecca's face. Oh my God, Mrs. Fairmont, I am so sorry. When Mrs. Fletcher presented the power of attorney documents, everything appeared to be in order. She was very convincing, spoke about your declining health, your inability to maintain such a large property, your desire to move into assisted living. All lies, I said flatly, every single word. Rebecca began gathering the papers with shaking hands. This is a nightmare. Mrs. Fairmont, I've been in real estate for 15 years, and I've never encountered a situation quite like this. When someone presents power of attorney documents, we're legally obligated to accept them at face value, but something about Mrs. Fletcher's demeanor bothered me from the beginning. I leaned forward, ignoring the sharp pain the movement caused in my back. What do you mean? She was eager, almost excited about the sale in a way that seemed inappropriate for someone supposedly helping an incapacitated family member. Most people in her position are somber, reluctant, clearly struggling with the necessity of selling a beloved family home. Mrs. Fletcher acted like she was planning a celebration. Rebecca pulled out her phone and scrolled through her messages. After she left my office with the signed contracts, I couldn't shake my uneasiness. That's why I decided to verify the power of attorney documents with an independent source. And I contacted the law firm listed on the letterhead Brennan, Walsh & Associates. Mrs. Fairmont, they have no record of drafting any power of attorney documents for your family. In fact, they told me they've never represented anyone named Fairmont. The hospital room fell silent, except for the steady beeping of my monitors and the distant sounds of medical equipment in the hallway. I stared at Rebecca's earnest face, processing the implications of what she'd just revealed. Are you saying the documents were forged? I'm saying they appear to be completely fabricated, Rebecca confirmed. The letterhead, the notary seal, the attorney signatures, all of it. Mrs. Fairmont, your daughter-in-law has committed real estate fraud, forgery, and possibly several other felonies. A strange calm settled over me, the same feeling I'd experienced years ago when the doctor had told me about Thomas's heart attack. In moments of crisis, I'd learned the mind either shatters or becomes crystal clear. Mine chose clarity. What happens now? I asked. Rebecca was already reaching for her phone. I'm calling my broker immediately to halt the transaction. The buyer's earnest money is still in escrow, and no funds have been transferred. We can void this sale completely, but Mrs. Fairmont, you need to understand, this is a criminal matter now. The authorities will need to be involved. Wait, I said, placing my hand on her arm before she could dial. Before you make any calls, I need to ask you something. Who are the buyers? Rebecca consulted her notes. A couple from California, Dr. James Morrison and his wife, Patricia. He's a tech entrepreneur who's sold several companies. They're relocating to our area for his wife's medical treatment. She has a rare autoimmune condition, and there's a specialist at University Hospital she needs to see regularly. My heart clenched, a sick woman seeking treatment, just like me. People who'd fallen in love with my family home and were planning to build their own memories there, only to have their dreams shattered by Veronica's greed. Are they devastated? I asked quietly. They're confused and upset, naturally. They've already made arrangements to ship their belongings from San Francisco, and Mrs. Morrison was so excited about the conservatory. She's an amateur botanist and was planning to restore it to its original glory. Rebecca paused, studying my face. Mrs. Fairmont, why do you ask? I thought about my grandmother's orchids, still blooming in that conservatory after all these years. I thought about Patricia Morrison, fighting her own health battles, finding hope in the idea of nurturing something beautiful back to life. Because, I said slowly, innocent people shouldn't suffer for Veronica's crimes. What's the timeline on halting the sale? I can stop everything with one phone call, but I need to do it today. The buyers are scheduled to do their final walkthrough tomorrow morning, and closing is set for Friday. Rebecca's phone buzzed with an incoming text message. She glanced at it and frowned. Speaking of which, that's Mrs. Fletcher now. She's asking about moving up the closing to tomorrow instead of Friday. She says she wants to, quote, expedite the process for everyone's convenience. Of course she did. Veronica was trying to rush the sale through before I could recover enough to interfere. She probably thought she had until Friday to celebrate her victory, not knowing that her house of lies was already crumbling. Miss Hartley, I said, making a decision that surprised even me, I need you to do something for me before you halt the sale. Anything, Mrs. Fairmont. I want you to arrange a meeting. Tell Veronica that the buyers have requested to meet with the family before closing. Say they want to hear stories about the house's history, understand its significance, something sentimental like that. Can you make that happen? Rebecca looked puzzled. I suppose so, but why? Because I want to be there when you reveal the truth about those forged documents. I want to see her face when she realizes her perfect plan has fallen apart. Mrs. Fairmont, you're still recovering from major surgery. Are you sure you're up for that kind of confrontation? I thought about 4 generations of Fairmont women who'd fought to protect what was theirs. I thought about my great-grandmother, who'd stood up to railroad barons who tried to cheat her husband. I thought about my grandmother, who'd saved the estate during the Great Depression by converting it into a boarding house. I thought about my mother, who'd hidden refugees in our basement during World War II, risking everything to do what was right. Miss Hartley, I said, my voice steady and strong, I've been preparing for this confrontation my entire life. I just didn't know it until now. Rebecca studied my face for a long moment, then nodded with something that looked like admiration. All right, Mrs. Fairmont. I'll set up the meeting for tomorrow afternoon. That gives me time to gather all the evidence and contact the appropriate authorities. But I want medical clearance for you to leave the hospital, and I want someone there to support you. I'll handle the medical clearance, I assured her. And as for support, I have someone in mind. After Rebecca left, I sat in my hospital bed, staring out the window at the city skyline. For the first time since Veronica's devastating phone call, I felt something other than heartbreak and rage. I felt anticipation. Veronica thought she'd outsmarted me, thought she'd caught me at my weakest moment. She had no idea that she'd just given me the perfect opportunity to show her exactly who she was dealing with. Tomorrow she would learn that the Fairmont family didn't go down without a fight. And this fight was just beginning. The next morning brought a flurry of activity that I orchestrated from my hospital bed like a general planning a military campaign. My first call was to Dr. Martinez, who was initially reluctant to discharge me so soon after surgery. Eleanor, you've only been here 3 days. Standard protocol for spinal surgery is at least a week of observation, followed by... Doctor, I interrupted gently but firmly, I need to handle an urgent legal matter regarding my property. If I don't act today, I could lose everything I own to fraud. After I explained the situation, Dr. Martinez's expression shifted from medical concern to personal outrage. Someone forged power of attorney documents while you were unconscious? That's unconscionable. He paused, reviewing my chart. Your recovery has been exceptional, and your mobility is already improving ahead of schedule. Against my better judgment, I'll authorize a day pass, but you must return tonight for observation. My second call was to Jonathan Whitmore, who'd already begun researching the legal implications of fraudulent power of attorney use. Eleanor, what Veronica has done constitutes multiple felonies. The forged documents alone carry a potential sentence of 5 to 10 years, and that's before we factor in the real estate fraud and theft. Jonathan, I need you to meet me at Rebecca Hartley's office this afternoon. Bring everything you found in your research and bring the documents from my safe. Are you sure you're ready for this? Confronting them publicly could be emotionally overwhelming so soon after your surgery. I thought about the conversation I'd had with my night nurse, Maria, who'd immigrated from Guatemala with nothing but determination and had worked 2 jobs to put herself through nursing school. She'd told me about her grandmother saying, "Misha, sometimes the universe tests us not to break us, but to show us how strong we really are." Jonathan, I've never been more ready for anything in my life. My 3rd call was the most difficult. I dialed David's number, knowing Veronica would likely be listening to every word. "Mom, how are you feeling?" "I was going to visit today, but Veronica said you needed rest." Of course she had. "David, I'm feeling much better. In fact, the doctors are amazed by my recovery. I should be back on my feet in no time." There was a pause. That's great, Mom. Really great." I could hear the uncertainty in his voice, the first crack in his confidence about their plan. "David, I'd like you and Veronica to meet me at Rebecca Hartley's real estate office this afternoon at 3 o'clock. The buyers want to meet the family before closing, to hear about the house's history." Well, we're pretty busy today. Maybe we could reschedule?" "David." I let my voice carry the authority I'd used when he was a child trying to avoid responsibility. "This is important. The buyers are lovely people, and they deserve to understand what they're purchasing. Surely you can spare an hour to honor your family's legacy." Another pause, longer this time. I could imagine Veronica in the background, frantically shaking her head, sensing danger. "Okay, Mom, we'll be there." After hanging up, I closed my eyes and allowed myself a moment of grief for the son I'd raised, the boy who used to bring me dandelions and declare them more beautiful than any rose. When had I lost him to Veronica's influence? When had his moral compass become so compromised that he could betray his own mother? But grief was a luxury I couldn't afford today. Today was about justice. At noon, Jonathan arrived with a wheelchair and a grim expression. "Eleanor, I've reviewed every document Rebecca provided, and the fraud is even more extensive than we initially thought." He helped me into the wheelchair, despite my protests that I could walk. The power of attorney documents aren't just forged, they're impossibly backdated. The notary seal belongs to someone who died 6 months ago, and the witness signatures belong to people who don't exist. "How sloppy can you get?" I muttered, though I wasn't entirely surprised. Veronica had always been impulsive, too confident in her own intelligence to pay attention to details. "There's more," Jonathan continued as we made our way through the hospital corridors. "I contacted the mortgage company. Your house has been fully paid off for 3 years, but according to the sales documents Veronica provided, she claimed there was still a substantial mortgage that needed to be satisfied from the sale proceeds." She lied about that too? She fabricated an entirely fictional financial situation to justify the sale. "Eleanor, this woman has committed so many crimes in the past 3 days that the district attorney is going to have trouble deciding which charges to file first." We arrived at Pinnacle Real Estate Group 15 minutes early, giving me time to compose myself and review the strategy. Rebecca Hartley had arranged the conference room to look like a normal closing meeting, with documents spread across the polished table and chairs arranged for all parties. But I noticed the small recording device she'd positioned discreetly in the center of the table, and the way she'd angled her laptop screen so it wasn't visible from the door. "Mrs. Fairmont, are you absolutely certain you want to proceed this way?" Rebecca asked for the 3rd time. "We could simply halt the sale and let the authorities handle the criminal prosecution." "Miss Hartley, my daughter-in-law has spent 3 years undermining my relationship with my son, convincing him that I'm a burden, that our family's history is worthless, that he'd be better off without me. Today, she's going to learn that actions have consequences, and David is going to see exactly who he married." At precisely 3 o'clock, I heard familiar voices in the reception area. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I watched Veronica stride confidently down the hallway, her platinum hair perfectly styled, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. David followed behind her, looking uncomfortable in an expensive suit that Veronica had undoubtedly chosen for him. "Remember," I whispered to Jonathan and Rebecca, "let them talk first. Give them enough rope to hang themselves." Veronica entered the conference room with a brilliant smile, clearly expecting to meet grateful buyers, ready to shower her with praise for facilitating such a smooth transaction. Instead, she found me sitting calmly at the head of the table, flanked by my attorney and the real estate agent who'd uncovered her fraud. The transformation in her expression was instantaneous and deeply satisfying. The confident smile faltered, her face went pale, and I watched her mind racing to recalculate the situation. "Eleanor," she said, her voice artificially bright. "What a surprise! I thought you were still in the hospital. Are you sure you should be out so soon?" "Hello, Veronica," I replied pleasantly. "I'm feeling remarkably well, actually. Amazing what proper medical care can accomplish. Please, have a seat. We have so much to discuss." David stepped forward, confusion written across his face. "Mom, where are the buyers? I thought we were meeting them." "Oh, David," I said softly, my heart breaking a little at his innocence. "We are meeting them. Dr. and Mrs. Morrison are on their way. But first, we need to clear up a few small issues about the sale." Veronica's eyes darted between Rebecca and Jonathan, clearly recognizing that this was not the routine meeting she'd expected. "What kind of issues?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled. Rebecca opened her portfolio and placed the first set of documents on the table. "Well, Mrs. Fletcher, let's start with these power of attorney documents you provided. The ones that supposedly gave you the legal authority to sell Mrs. Fairmont's property." I watched Veronica's face as Rebecca methodically laid out each piece of evidence. The forged letterhead, the false notary seal, the fabricated attorney signatures, the impossible dates. With each revelation, Veronica's composure cracked a little more, until she was gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. David stood frozen, staring at the documents spread before him. "Mom," he said slowly, "what is this?" "This, David," I said gently, "is what your wife has been doing while I was fighting for my life in surgery. She forged legal documents to steal our family home." The silence that followed was deafening, and I knew that the real confrontation was just beginning. The conference room remained eerily silent as David picked up the forged power of attorney documents with trembling hands. I watched my son's face transform as the reality of what he was seeing sank in, the confusion giving way to horror, then to a dawning understanding of how completely he'd been manipulated. "Veronica," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "these signatures, this isn't Mom's attorney. This isn't even Mom's handwriting on the witness line." Veronica's carefully constructed facade was crumbling by the second, but she made one last desperate attempt to maintain control. "David, darling, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. Your mother is obviously confused from the pain medication." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months," David interrupted, something in his tone I hadn't heard since he was a teenager standing up to schoolyard bullies. "Mom, I need to understand something. Did you sign these documents? Did you ever authorize this sale?" I met my son's eyes, seeing the boy I'd raised somewhere beneath the man Veronica had tried to reshape. "David, I was unconscious during surgery when these documents were supposedly signed. I first learned about the sale when Veronica called to gloat about it while I was still groggy from anesthesia." The color drained completely from David's face. He turned to his wife, and for the first time in 3 years, I saw him look at her with something other than blind adoration. "Veronica, tell me this is some kind of misunderstanding. Tell me you didn't forge legal documents to sell my mother's house." Veronica's composure finally snapped. "Oh, for God's sake, David. Yes, I forged the documents. Someone had to make the hard decisions while you were too weak to do what needed to be done." Her voice rose to nearly a shriek, all pretense of the sweet, concerned daughter-in-law evaporating. Your mother has been holding you back for years, keeping you tied to that monstrous old house and her pathetic nostalgia. I did what you were too spineless to do yourself." The silence that followed her outburst was profound. Rebecca had gone completely still, her finger hovering over the record button on her device. Jonathan was taking rapid notes, documenting every word for the inevitable legal proceedings. But I only had eyes for David, watching the final scales fall from his eyes as he truly saw his wife for the first time. You committed multiple felonies," David said, his voice hollow with shock. "You stole from my mother. You forged legal documents. He stopped, running his hands through his hair. "Jesus, Veronica, what have you done?" "I've set us free," Veronica snapped back, her mask completely off now. "Do you have any idea what that property is worth? We could have bought a penthouse in Manhattan, invested in real opportunities, lived like we deserve to live, instead of being tied down by your mother's sentimental attachment to rotting wood and outdated traditions." At that moment, my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with vindication. "Actually," I said calmly, "that brings up an interesting point about the property's value." I showed my phone to Rebecca, who nodded and pulled up something on her laptop. "Mrs. Fletcher," Rebecca said, her professional demeanor now tinged with cold disapproval, "when you listed the property, you claimed it was worth $850,000. That's the price you negotiated with the Morrisons." Veronica lifted her chin defiantly. "It's a fair market price. I researched comparable properties extensively." "Did you?" I asked mildly, because I just received a text from the Historical Society. It seems that while I was in the hospital, they completed their research into our property's historical significance. The Fairmont estate has just been approved for inclusion on the National Register of Historic Places. I watched the blood drain from Veronica's face as the implications hit her. "What does that mean?" David asked, though his business degree suggested he probably already knew. Jonathan answered with grim satisfaction. "It means the property is worth significantly more than $850,000. Properties with National Historic designation in this area typically appraise for $1.80 to $2.2 million, especially estates with the Fairmont House's architectural significance and documented provenance." "You see, Veronica," I continued, my voice remaining steady despite the rage building inside me, "while you were busy forging documents and planning your Manhattan penthouse, I was working with the Historical Society to protect our family legacy for future generations. The designation process took 2 years, but it finally came through." Veronica's face had gone from pale to greenish, and she sank into her chair as if her legs could no longer support her. That's impossible." "You never mentioned." "I never mentioned many things," I said quietly. "For instance, I never mentioned that Thomas and I installed a comprehensive security system 5 years ago after a break-in attempt. The system includes motion-activated cameras in every room, all connected to a cloud storage service that maintains footage for 6 months." The room went dead silent except for the sound of Veronica's sharp intake of breath. "Which means," Jonathan added with evident satisfaction, "we have video evidence of Mrs. Fletcher entering the house without permission, removing items and meeting with contractors who were clearly measuring rooms for renovation. All of this occurred while Mrs. Fairmont was hospitalized and unable to consent to entry." "That's breaking and entering," Rebecca pointed out helpfully, "along with the fraud, forgery, and theft charges." David was staring at his wife as if seeing a stranger. "Veronica, you went into Mom's house without permission? You brought contractors in?" "I was planning renovations for when we moved in," Veronica burst out, desperation creeping into her voice. "I was trying to modernize that ancient place so we could actually live there comfortably. We were never moving into my mother's house," David said slowly. "We discussed this multiple times. You said you wanted a modern condo downtown." "I said what you needed to hear," Veronica screamed, all pretense finally abandoned. "I've spent 3 years managing your relationship with your clingy, manipulative mother, trying to free you from her emotional blackmail, and this is the thanks I get? I felt something cold and final settle in my chest as I listened to Veronica's true feelings pour out. This woman had systematically worked to destroy my relationship with my son, had planned to steal and gut the home that represented 4 generations of my family's history, and had committed multiple felonies to do it. But more than that, she'd revealed something that cut deeper than any legal crime. She'd never loved David for who he was. She'd seen him as a project to be managed, his family connections as obstacles to be eliminated, his inheritance as resources to be exploited. "David," I said gently, "I think you need to understand something important. According to the security footage and the legal documents Jonathan has been reviewing, Veronica didn't just forge my signature on the power of attorney. She forged yours too." David's head snapped up. "What?" Jonathan slid another document across the table. "This is your signature authorizing the sale, dated 3 days ago. According to your credit card records, you were in Chicago on business that day, attending a technology conference. You couldn't have signed this document." David stared at the forged signature, then at his wife, then back at the document. When he finally looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "Veronica," he whispered, "you forged my signature too. You made me an unwitting accomplice to stealing from my own mother." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than anger toward my daughter-in-law. I felt pity. Because as I watched David's face transform with the full realization of what she'd done, I knew that Veronica had just lost everything she'd schemed so hard to gain. The question now was whether there was anything left to salvage from the wreckage she'd created. The atmosphere in the conference room had shifted dramatically. What had begun as Veronica's confident march toward victory had devolved into a desperate woman cornered by the consequences of her own actions. David sat frozen in his chair, staring at the forged signature that bore his name, while Veronica's breathing became increasingly rapid and shallow. "I need some air," Veronica said suddenly, pushing back from the table. "This is all. This is too much. David, we need to leave, now." "Sit down, Veronica," David said quietly, his voice carrying an authority I hadn't heard from him in years. "We're not going anywhere until I understand the full scope of what you've done." Rebecca cleared her throat diplomatically. "Actually, Mrs. Fletcher, I should mention that Detective Williams from the Willowbrook Heights Police Department is on his way here. Given the severity of the fraud that's been uncovered, I was legally obligated to report it." Veronica's face went ashen. "Police? You called the police?" "Multiple felonies have been committed," Jonathan explained matter-of-factly. "Forgery, fraud, breaking and entering, theft by deception, and potentially identity theft. The district attorney's office will need to determine which charges to file." I watched Veronica's facade continue to crumble as the reality of her situation became clear. This wasn't a civil dispute that could be settled with lawyers and negotiations. This was criminal behavior that could result in years in prison. "Eleanor," Veronica said, her voice taking on a pleading tone I'd never heard before, "surely we can work this out between family members. I made some questionable decisions, but my intentions were good. I was trying to help David plan for your future care needs." "By stealing a house worth over $2 million? I asked calmly. "By forging legal documents? By breaking into my home and planning to gut 4 generations of family history?" "I was trying to modernize," Veronica began. "You were trying to erase," I interrupted, my voice growing stronger. "Every conversation we've had over the past 3 years has been about erasing our family's past, convincing David that tradition and history are burdens instead of treasures. You wanted to turn my son into someone who would abandon his own mother for your vision of what his life should be." David looked up from the forged documents, his eyes red-rimmed but his voice steady. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." I nodded, bracing myself for whatever was coming. "Over the past 3 years, have I been treating you badly? Have I been neglecting you because of things Veronica said?" The question broke my heart because it confirmed what I'd suspected. David's gradual withdrawal hadn't been entirely his choice. "David, do you remember our Sunday dinners? How you used to help me in the garden every weekend? How you'd call me every morning on your way to work just to check in?" "Of course I remember. He paused, a look of dawning realization crossing his face. "When did I stop doing those things?" "About 6 months after you started dating Veronica," I said gently. "She always had reasons why you couldn't come. Work commitments, social obligations, places you needed to be that were more important than spending time with your aging mother." Veronica suddenly exploded from her chair. "That's not fair. I never told him he couldn't see you. I just pointed out that he had a life of his own to live, that he couldn't be at your beck and call forever." "You told him I was manipulative," I said quietly. "You told him I was using emotional blackmail to keep him dependent on me. You convinced him that loving his family was a weakness instead of a strength." David's hands were shaking as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "I need to check something," he said, scrolling through his contacts. "Mom, what's your phone number?" I recited the number I'd had for 15 years, the same number David had called thousands of times. David's face went pale as he stared at his phone screen. "It's not here," he whispered. "Your number isn't in my phone anymore." Veronica's guilty expression told us everything we needed to know. "You deleted my mother's number from my phone?" David asked, his voice rising with incredulous anger. "I was trying to help you establish boundaries," Veronica protested. "You were too weak to do it yourself, so You sabotaged my relationship with my mother." David stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. "You systematically isolated me from my own family." "What else did you do, Veronica? What other lies did you tell me?" At that moment, there was a knock on the conference room door. Through the glass, I could see a uniformed police officer and a man in a suit who was clearly Detective Williams. Rebecca went to greet them, leaving our family to face the wreckage of what Veronica had created. "David," Veronica said, desperation making her voice shrill, "you have to understand. I love you. Everything I did was because I love you, and I want us to have a future together. That house, your mother's constant demands on your time and attention, it was all holding you back from reaching your potential." "My potential?" David laughed bitterly. "Veronica, my potential was never tied to how much money I could make or what kind of house I could afford. My potential was about being the kind of man my father raised me to be. Someone who honors his family, keeps his word, and protects the people he loves." He turned to me, tears streaming down his face. "Mom, I am so sorry. I don't know how I let this happen. I don't know how I let her convince me that you were the problem when she was the one destroying our family." Before I could respond, Detective Williams entered the room with Rebecca. "Mrs. Fairmont, I'm Detective Williams. I understand you'd like to file charges regarding fraudulent real estate transactions." I looked at Veronica, who was now crying and clinging to David's arm as he tried to pull away from her. I thought about the 3 years of manipulation, the lies, the systematic destruction of my relationship with my son. I thought about the house that 4 generations of my family had loved and protected, nearly lost to one woman's greed and ambition. But I also thought about David's face when he realized his phone number had been deleted, the devastation in his eyes when he understood how completely he'd been manipulated. Veronica had already lost everything that mattered: her husband's love and trust, her freedom, her future. The question was whether pressing charges would help my family heal or simply create more pain. "Detective Williams," I said carefully, "before we proceed with charges, I'd like to propose something to Mrs. Fletcher." Veronica looked up hopefully through her tears. "I want you to understand," I continued, "that what you've done is unforgivable. You've committed serious crimes, destroyed relationships, and caused immeasurable harm. But I'm going to give you one chance, one single opportunity, to avoid spending the next decade in prison." The room went completely silent as everyone waited for my terms. You're going to sign a complete confession detailing every illegal act you've committed. You're going to return every penny you intended to steal. You're going to sign papers relinquishing any claim to my son's inheritance or any Fairmont family assets. And then you're going to disappear from our lives forever. Veronica's face went through a series of emotions: hope, calculation, desperation, and finally, a cold acceptance of defeat. "And if I refuse?" she asked quietly. I smiled, and for the first time in days, it was a genuine smile. "Then Detective Williams will arrest you right now, and you'll spend the next 10 to 15 years in state prison for multiple felonies. The choice is yours, Veronica, but choose quickly. My patience has run out." The conference room fell into intense silence as Veronica weighed her options. I could practically see the calculations running through her mind. Prison versus public humiliation, criminal record versus financial ruin, fighting the charges versus accepting defeat. Detective Williams stood patiently by the door, his hand resting casually near his handcuffs, while Jonathan had already begun preparing legal documents on his laptop. "How long do I have to decide?" Veronica asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have until I finish counting to 10, I replied calmly. 1. "Mom," David interrupted, his voice strained. "Maybe we should." 2, I continued, keeping my eyes fixed on Veronica. "Eleanor, please," Veronica said, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I know I made mistakes, but surely we can find some middle ground." 3. 4. Detective Williams shifted slightly, reaching for the handcuffs on his belt. "Ma'am, if you're going to make a decision, now would be the time." 5. 6. Veronica's composure finally shattered completely. "Stop, please, just stop." She buried her face in her hands, her whole body shaking with sobs. "I'll sign whatever you want. I'll confess to everything. Just, please, don't send me to prison." I felt no satisfaction in her breakdown, only a deep exhaustion at the damage that had been done to our family. "Jonathan, do you have the confession documents ready?" "I do," he replied, pulling papers from his briefcase. "This is a comprehensive confession that details each criminal act, including dates, methods, and motivations. It also includes financial restitution terms and a permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact with the Fairmont family." Veronica lifted her head, makeup smeared and eyes red with tears. "What about David? I can't never see David again." David, who had been sitting in stunned silence, finally spoke. "Veronica, after what you've done, after the lies you've told, after the way you manipulated me into betraying my own mother, I never want to see you again either." The finality in his voice seemed to break something fundamental inside Veronica. She stared at him, as if seeing him for the first time, perhaps finally understanding that her perfect plan had cost her everything she'd claimed to be fighting for. "David, please," she whispered. "I love you. I did this for us, for our future. Can't you see that?" "No, Veronica," David replied, his voice growing stronger with each word. "You did this for yourself. You wanted the money, the lifestyle, the freedom from what you saw as inconvenient family obligations. You never loved me. You loved the idea of molding me into someone who would give you everything you wanted." Rebecca, who had been quietly observing the family drama, cleared her throat diplomatically. "I should mention that Dr. and Mrs. Morrison are still interested in purchasing the property, but at fair market value reflecting its historic designation. If Mrs. Fairmont chooses to sell to them legitimately, they're prepared to offer $2.1 million. "I'm not selling," I said firmly. "That house has been in my family for 4 generations, and God willing, it will remain there for 4 more. The Morrisons seem like lovely people, but the Fairmont estate is not for sale." Veronica looked up sharply. "But you can't possibly maintain a property that size at your age, especially after your surgery." "Mrs. Fletcher," Detective Williams interrupted, I'd suggest you focus on the legal documents in front of you rather than offering unsolicited advice to your victim." The word victim seemed to hit Veronica like a physical blow. She picked up the confession with trembling hands, scanning the pages that would formally acknowledge her crimes and seal her fate. "There's so much legal language," she said weakly. "I don't understand half of these terms." "Allow me to summarize," Jonathan said with professional detachment. "You're confessing to forgery, fraud, breaking and entering, theft by deception, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. You're agreeing to pay $50,000 in restitution for legal fees, emotional distress, and security system upgrades. You're waiving any claim to marital assets or inheritance rights. And you're accepting a permanent restraining order that prohibits you from contacting any member of the Fairmont family or coming within 500 feet of the family property." "$50,000? Veronica's voice cracked. "I don't have that kind of money." "Then you'll need to find it," I said unsympathetically. "Sell your car. Liquidate your investments. Ask your family for help. I don't care how you get it, but you will pay for the damage you've caused." David reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. "Actually, Mom, I think I can help with that." He produced a platinum credit card and set it on the table. "Veronica's been using this for her shopping sprees and spa treatments. According to the statements, she's charged about $30,000 in the past 6 months alone." Veronica stared at the credit card in horror. "David, you can't. That's my money, too. We're married." "Not for much longer," David replied grimly. "I'll be filing for divorce tomorrow morning, and given your criminal activities, I doubt you'll be entitled to much in the settlement." Jonathan nodded approvingly. "In fact, the criminal confession will significantly impact any divorce proceedings. Fraud committed during marriage typically voids spousal rights to marital assets." I watched Veronica's face as the full scope of her situation became clear. She'd gambled everything on a scheme that she thought would set her up for life, and instead she'd lost her husband, her home, her financial security, and her freedom. The life of luxury she'd envisioned had evaporated along with David's love and trust. "I need a pen," she said finally, her voice hollow with defeat. Rebecca provided a pen, and we all watched as Veronica slowly signed her name to each page of the confession. Her signature, ironically, was genuine this time, unlike the forged documents that had started this whole nightmare. Detective Williams reviewed the signed confession and nodded to Jonathan. "This looks comprehensive. Mrs. Fletcher, you understand that this document can and will be used against you if you violate any of its terms?" "I understand," Veronica whispered. "And you understand that while this agreement prevents immediate prosecution, the statute of limitations on these crimes doesn't expire for 7 years? If you violate the restraining order or fail to pay restitution, charges can still be filed?" "Yes, I understand." David stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the parking lot below. "I keep thinking about all the Sunday dinners I missed," he said quietly. "All the times you convinced me that Mom was being manipulative when she just wanted to spend time with her son. How many conversations did you monitor? How many messages did you delete? How many lies did you tell me about what she said or did?" Veronica couldn't meet his eyes. "I was trying to help you become independent." "You were trying to isolate me," David interrupted. "You wanted me completely dependent on you so you could control every aspect of my life. The house was just the beginning, wasn't it? Eventually you would have found reasons to cut me off from all my friends, my colleagues, anyone who might have questioned your version of reality." The accuracy of his assessment was written all over Veronica's face. She'd been caught not just in a criminal scheme, but in a pattern of emotional manipulation that went far deeper than financial fraud. "The divorce papers will be served within 48 hours, David continued. "I'll be staying at Mom's house until I can find my own place. You can keep the apartment, but I'm canceling all the credit cards and removing you from my bank accounts." "David, please." Veronica made one last desperate attempt. "We can work through this. People make mistakes, but that doesn't mean—" "Mistakes?" David turned from the window, his eyes blazing with anger. "Veronica, You committed felonies. You stole from my mother. You forged my signature. You systematically destroyed my relationship with my family. These weren't mistakes. This was a calculated campaign to steal everything my family built and turn me into your personal ATM. The truth of his words hung in the air like a verdict. Veronica had gambled everything on a scheme built on lies and manipulation, and she'd lost completely. As I watched her gather her purse with shaking hands, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For 3 years, I'd been fighting a war one didn't fully understand against an enemy who smiled to my face while stabbing me in the back. Now, finally, the war was over. And my family was going to heal. 3 hours after Veronica's signed confession was notarized and filed with Detective Williams, I found myself back in my hospital bed, physically and emotionally drained but oddly at peace. David sat in the visitor's chair beside me, still processing everything that had happened, occasionally shaking his head as if he couldn't quite believe the past few days were real. "Mom," he said quietly, "I need to understand something. How long have you known that Veronica was like this?" I adjusted my position carefully, my back still tender from the surgery. "I knew she was manipulative from the first month you brought her home. But David, I never imagined she was capable of criminal behavior. I thought she was just ambitious and self-centered." "What gave it away so early?" I smiled sadly, remembering those first uncomfortable Sunday dinners. She asked too many questions about money. Not about our family history, not about your childhood, not about what made you happy. She wanted to know about property values, investment portfolios, inheritance plans. And she had this way of subtly criticizing everything about our traditions while making it sound like helpful suggestions. David winced. "I remember those conversations differently. She seemed interested in our family." "She was interested in our assets," I corrected gently. "There's a difference. When someone truly cares about your family, they ask about stories and memories. When they're calculating value, they ask about square footage and market prices." My phone buzzed with a text message from Rebecca Hartley. I read it and couldn't help but smile. "What is it?" David asked. Dr. and Mrs. Morrison sent a message through Rebecca. They said they completely understand about the house not being for sale, and they wanted to apologize for getting caught up in Veronica's scheme, even unknowingly. But here's the interesting part. Mrs. Morrison is a botanical researcher, and she's offered to help restore the conservatory's orchid collection as a volunteer project. David's face brightened slightly. "Great-grandmother's orchids?" "The very ones. Apparently Mrs. Morrison specializes in heritage plant restoration. She thinks she can help me bring the collection back to its original glory." I set my phone aside. It seems that some good might come out of this mess after all. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset through the hospital window. Finally, David spoke again, his voice heavy with regret. "Mom, I need to ask you to forgive me for things I'm not sure can be forgiven. I let Veronica convince me that you were the problem. I missed birthdays, holidays, important moments in your life because I believed her lies about you being manipulative and needy." "David, please let me finish," he interrupted. "I signed those power of attorney documents 2 years ago because I genuinely thought I was protecting you. But somewhere along the way, I stopped checking on you, stopped caring about your well-being the way I should have. Even if I didn't know about the fraud, I failed you as a son long before Veronica tried to steal the house." The pain in his voice broke my heart. "David, manipulation works because it's gradual. It starts with small compromises. Little changes in perspective that seem reasonable. Veronica was very skilled at making her suggestions sound like wisdom rather than control. But I should have seen it," he insisted. "Dad taught me to be a better man than that." "Your father would be proud of you for recognizing it now and choosing to make it right," I said firmly. "That's what matters. Not that you were deceived, but that you found the courage to see the truth and act on it." David reached over and took my hand carefully, mindful of the IV line. "I want to make this right, Mom. I want to rebuild our relationship. But I'm not sure I know how to start. We start the same way we always did, I said softly. Sunday dinners, garden work, conversations about things that matter. We start by being family again. A soft knock at the door interrupted us. Dr. Martinez entered, carrying my discharge papers and looking pleased with my progress. Eleanor, I have to admit, your recovery has been remarkable. Your mobility tests this afternoon were exceptional for someone who had major spinal surgery less than a week ago. I think the emotional resolution of your legal situation has had a positive impact on your physical healing. Stress is a powerful thing, I agreed, both negatively and positively. I'm discharging you tomorrow morning with a recommendation for outpatient physical therapy 3 times a week for the next month. After that, you should be back to normal activities. He paused, glancing at David. Will you have help at home during your recovery? Yes, David said immediately. I'll be staying at the house to help with whatever Mom needs. Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly. Family support makes all the difference in recovery. Eleanor, I want to see you in 2 weeks for a follow-up, but based on your progress, I expect you'll be gardening again by early summer. After he left, David and I began planning the practical aspects of our new reality. He would move back into his childhood bedroom temporarily while apartment hunting. We'd need to change all the locks on the house and review the security system. The conservatory restoration project with Mrs. Morrison would begin once I was fully mobile. There's something else I need to tell you, David said as visiting hours were winding down. I've been thinking about my job situation. What about it? I've been working in corporate technology for 8 years. Making good money but never feeling fulfilled. Veronica was always pushing me to take higher-paying positions, move to bigger companies, focus on advancing my career above everything else. He paused, looking almost embarrassed. But I've always wanted to teach. Maybe high school computer science or community college courses, something that would let me actually help people learn instead of just generating profit for shareholders. I felt a surge of pride and recognition. Your father always said you had a teacher's heart. You used to love helping your classmates with their homework. The pay would be significantly less than what I make now, David continued. Veronica always said that was foolish, that I had an obligation to maximize my earning potential. But maybe it's time I stopped living by her values and started living by my own. David, your worth as a person has nothing to do with your salary. Your father and I didn't raise you to be a walking bank account. We raised you to be a good man who contributes something meaningful to the world. His eyes filled with tears. I'd forgotten that. I'd completely forgotten what actually mattered. Well, I said, squeezing his hand, you have plenty of time to remember now. As David prepared to leave for the evening, he hesitated at the door. Mom, there's one more thing. I know Veronica caused tremendous damage, and I know rebuilding trust will take time. But I want you to know that losing you, really losing you, not just having our relationship damaged, that would have destroyed me. You didn't lose me, David. You never could. That's what family means. We weather the storms together, and we rebuild together. Tomorrow, we start rebuilding. After he left, I lay in my hospital bed thinking about the events of the past week. A few days ago, I'd awakened from surgery to discover that everything I held dear was being stolen from me. Tonight, I was going home to a house that was still mine, with a son who was truly mine again, and a future that looked brighter than it had in 3 years. Veronica had tried to destroy everything my family had built, but in the end, she'd given us something precious, the chance to rediscover what really mattered, and the opportunity to build something even stronger from the ashes of her betrayal. Sometimes, I realized, the greatest threats to our happiness come disguised as the very people who claim to want what's best for us. But the truth has a way of revealing itself, and family, real family, has a way of enduring even the most calculated attacks. Tomorrow, David and I would go home together, and we would begin the work of healing. The morning of my discharge brought an unexpected visitor. I was finishing my breakfast and reviewing the physical therapy instructions when a woman in her 50s with kind brown eyes and graying hair appeared in my doorway, holding a small potted orchid. Mrs. Fairmont, I'm Patricia Morrison. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but my husband and I wanted to meet you before we left town. I gestured for her to enter, immediately recognizing her as half of the couple who'd been caught in Veronica's web of lies. Mrs. Morrison, please come in. I'm so sorry you and your husband were dragged into this mess. Patricia took the visitor's chair and placed the orchid on my bedside table. Actually, we wanted to thank you for handling the situation with such grace. Rebecca Hartley explained everything that happened. What your daughter-in-law did was unconscionable. The orchid was exquisite, a pale lavender phalaenopsis with delicate white markings that reminded me of my grandmother's prized specimens. This is beautiful, I said, touching one of the petals gently. It's a cutting from my personal collection, Patricia explained. When Rebecca mentioned that your family had maintained an orchid conservatory for generations, I couldn't resist bringing you something special. This particular variety is descended from plants that came from Victorian-era botanical expeditions. It's perfect, I said, feeling oddly emotional about this small gesture of kindness from a stranger. Mrs. Morrison, I need to apologize again for the confusion about the house sale. I understand you and your husband have had to change your relocation plans. Patricia waved dismissively. Please, call me Patricia, and don't apologize for protecting your family's heritage. James and I have actually found something even better. A lovely colonial on the other side of Willowbrook Heights, with south-facing windows perfect for my plants. Sometimes these setbacks lead us exactly where we're meant to be. She leaned forward, her expression growing more serious. Mrs. Fairmont, I wanted to tell you something that might give you some peace of mind. When Rebecca showed us the security footage of Mrs. Fletcher bringing contractors through your house, James and I were horrified. She was planning to gut the entire interior and install what she called a quote, smart home ecosystem. My stomach clenched. What exactly did she plan to do? Complete modernization. Remove all the original woodwork. Replace the stained glass windows with energy-efficient alternatives. Tear out the grand staircase to create an open-concept living space. She even wanted to convert your conservatory into a home gym. Patricia's voice carried genuine distress. Mrs. Fairmont, she was planning to destroy everything that made that house historically significant. The thought of my great-grandfather's hand-carved mahogany staircase being demolished, of my grandmother's conservatory filled with exercise equipment instead of blooming orchids, made me feel physically ill. Veronica hadn't just tried to steal my house, she'd planned to erase 4 generations of my family's legacy. There's more, Patricia continued gently. According to Rebecca, Mrs. Fletcher had already contacted several antique dealers about selling the original furnishings. She had appointments scheduled for this week to have everything appraised and removed. I closed my eyes, trying to process the full scope of what Veronica had planned. Not only would I have lost my home, but everything inside it. My grandmother's china cabinet, my great-grandfather's library, my mother's piano, the family portraits that lined the hallways. All of it would have been sold to strangers. Patricia, I said finally, thank you for telling me. It's horrible to know, but I needed to understand how thoroughly she planned to destroy everything. The important thing is that you stopped her, Patricia said firmly. And, Mrs. Fairmont, I meant what I said about helping restore your orchid collection. I've spent 30 years studying heritage botanical varieties, and I'd consider it an honor to help bring your conservatory back to its original glory. At that moment, David arrived with a wheelchair and a bouquet of roses from the hospital gift shop. He stopped short when he saw Patricia, and I made introductions. Mr. Fairmont, Patricia said, standing to shake his hand. I was just telling your mother how much my husband and I admire the way your family handled this situation. Not many people would have shown such restraint in dealing with someone who committed such serious crimes. David's expression grew troubled. Mrs. Morrison, I owe you and your husband an apology. If I hadn't been so blind to what Veronica was doing, you never would have been put through this confusion and disappointment. Nonsense, Patricia replied briskly. You were betrayed by someone you trusted. That's not a character flaw. That's evidence that you have a trusting heart. Don't let her crimes make you cynical about people. After Patricia left with promises to visit the conservatory once I was settled at home, David helped me into the wheelchair for the journey to his car. As we made our way through the hospital corridors, I noticed him checking his phone repeatedly. "Everything all right?" I asked. "I've been getting calls and texts all morning," he said, looking embarrassed. "Word has gotten out about what happened. Some are from friends expressing support, but others—" He hesitated. "Others what?" "Others are from Veronica's friends and colleagues, telling me I'm making a huge mistake, that I'm throwing away my marriage over a family misunderstanding." David's voice carried a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Mrs. Fletcher apparently sent a group email claiming that you manipulated the situation to turn me against her." I wasn't surprised. Veronica was a skilled manipulator who would never accept full responsibility for her actions. She'd probably convinced herself that she was the real victim in this situation. "How are you responding to them?" I asked. "I'm not," David replied firmly. "I've decided to block anyone who doesn't understand that fraud and forgery aren't misunderstandings. The people who matter know the truth." As we drove through Willowbrook Heights toward the family estate, I watched the familiar neighborhoods pass by and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Just a week ago, I'd thought I would never see these streets from the perspective of someone returning home. I'd thought Veronica had stolen not just my house, but my entire identity. "David," I said as we turned onto Elm Ridge Drive, "I want you to know that what happened this week, as painful as it was, has given me something I'd lost hope of having again." "What's that?" "My son," I said simply. "The real David, not the version Veronica tried to create. I have my son back." David pulled into the circular driveway and sat for a moment, staring up at the house that had nearly been lost forever. "Mom, I promise you this. I will never let anyone come between us again. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure this house and everything in it stays in our family, where it belongs." As we sat there looking at the Victorian mansion that had weathered so many storms, I thought about the conversation I'd had with Patricia Morrison. Veronica had come closer to destroying everything than I'd initially realized. She hadn't just planned to steal my house, she'd planned to erase my family's entire history, to turn our legacy into cash for her shopping sprees and lifestyle upgrades. But she'd failed. And now, as David helped me out of the car and we walked together toward the front door of the house that was still ours, I realized that Veronica's greatest miscalculation hadn't been underestimating the legal system or overlooking the security cameras. Her greatest mistake had been underestimating the strength of family bonds that had been built over 4 generations. She'd thought that love could be manipulated, that loyalty could be purchased, that history could be erased with forged documents and smooth lies. She'd been wrong about all of it. And now, as David unlocked the front door and we stepped together into the foyer where 4 generations of Fairmonts had welcomed guests, I knew that our family's story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning a new chapter. The confrontation I'd been dreading came 2 weeks after returning home, just as I was beginning to feel secure in my recovery. I was in the conservatory with Patricia Morrison, who had become a weekly visitor as we worked together to restore the orchid collection, when David burst through the French doors with his phone in his hand and fury written across his face. "She violated the restraining order," he announced without preamble. "Veronica just called me 15 times in a row, and when I didn't answer, she started texting threats." Patricia looked up from the delicate orchid cutting she'd been examining. "Threats? What kind of threats?" David scrolled through his phone, his jaw tightening with each message. "She says she's going to contest the confession she signed, claims she was coerced under duress. She's threatening to sue for emotional distress and mental anguish. And?" He paused, his face growing darker. "She's claiming that Mom bribed the real estate agent and forged the security camera footage." I set down my gardening shears carefully, feeling my hard-won peace evaporating. Is she serious about contesting the confession? According to her latest message, she's hired a lawyer, some hotshot criminal defense attorney from the city, who specializes in white-collar crime. She's claiming temporary insanity due to emotional manipulation by you, Mom." Patricia made a disgusted sound. "This woman is unbelievable. She commits multiple felonies, gets caught red-handed, signs a confession to avoid prison, and now she wants to claim she was the victim?" "There's more," David continued grimly. "She's apparently been spreading rumors around town that I was brainwashed by my controlling mother, that our family manipulated the situation to frame an innocent woman. Some of her friends have been calling my office, demanding to know how I could abandon my wife during her, quote, mental health crisis." I felt a familiar knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. Veronica wasn't going quietly into the night as I'd hoped. She was going to fight, using every weapon in her arsenal of manipulation and lies. "David, hand me your phone," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Let me read exactly what she's threatening." The messages were worse than I'd imagined. Veronica hadn't just violated the restraining order with the calls and texts. She was laying the groundwork for a comprehensive attack on our credibility. She claimed the security cameras had been tampered with, that Rebecca Hartley had been paid to lie about the forged documents, that I had orchestrated the entire situation to frame her for crimes she never committed. But the most chilling message was the last one. "David, your mother is a manipulative psychopath who destroyed our marriage because she couldn't stand to lose control over you. I'm going to prove it in court, and when I do, everyone will see what kind of woman really raised you. This isn't over." "She's not just threatening legal action," I said quietly. "She's declaring war." At that moment, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jonathan Whitmore's office. "Eleanor," he said without preamble when I answered, "we have a problem. I just received a call from Mitchell Blackstone. He's representing Mrs. Fletcher now. He's filing motions to have her confession declared invalid and all charges dropped." "On what grounds?" "Coercion, duress, and mental incapacity at the time of signing. He's claiming that you orchestrated an elaborate scheme to frame his client, taking advantage of her emotional distress over your hospitalization to force a false confession." Patricia and David exchanged worried glances as they listened to my side of the conversation. "Jonathan, how strong is their case?" "Legally, it's weak. We have overwhelming evidence of her crimes, multiple witnesses, and comprehensive documentation. But Eleanor, this isn't really about the law anymore. Blackstone is known for his media manipulation tactics. He's going to try this case in the court of public opinion, turning Mrs. Fletcher into a sympathetic figure who is victimized by a vindictive family." After I hung up, the three of us sat in the conservatory, surrounded by the gentle beauty of blooming orchids, discussing the harsh reality of what lay ahead. "They're going to make me the villain," I said, voicing what we were all thinking. "Veronica will play the role of the devoted wife who is trying to help her sick mother-in-law, while I become the manipulative matriarch who destroyed an innocent woman's life." "But that's not what happened," David protested. "We have proof of everything she did." "Proof doesn't always matter in the court of public opinion," Patricia said sadly. "I've seen this before. Skilled lawyers can twist any narrative to serve their purposes." David stood up abruptly and began pacing between the orchid tables. "This is my fault. If I'd been stronger, if I'd seen through her manipulation earlier, none of this would have happened." "David, stop," I said firmly. "This is not your fault. This is what Veronica does. She manipulates situations until everyone around her feels guilty and responsible for her actions." My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. I read it and felt my blood run cold. "What is it?" Patricia asked, noticing my expression. "It's from a reporter," I said quietly. "Channel 7 News wants to interview me about the, quote, family feud that tore apart a young marriage. They've already interviewed Veronica, and they want my response to her claims that I orchestrated an elaborate fraud to frame her." David stopped pacing and stared at me. "She went to the media? She actually went to the press with this?" "It's a smart strategy," I admitted reluctantly. If she can convince people that she's the victim, it puts pressure on the district attorney's office to reconsider prosecution. Public sympathy can influence legal decisions. Patricia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Eleanor, you cannot let this woman rewrite history. Too many people saw what really happened. Rebecca Hartley, Detective Williams, Dr. Martinez, they all witnessed her crimes firsthand. But will they want to get involved in a media circus? I asked. Rebecca has a business to protect. Detective Williams has other cases to worry about. People don't like being dragged into public scandals. David sat back down, his expression determined. Mom, I have an idea. What if we don't wait for Veronica to control the narrative? What if we tell our story first? What do you mean? I mean, we hold our own press conference. We present all the evidence publicly. The forged documents, the security footage, the confession she signed. We let the facts speak for themselves before she can twist them into lies. I considered this for a moment. It was risky. Once we entered the media battlefield, there would be no going back. But David was right about one thing. Letting Veronica control the narrative would be even more dangerous. There's something else to consider, Patricia said thoughtfully. Mrs. Fletcher made one crucial mistake in going public with this. If she claims the confession was signed under duress, she's essentially admitting that she committed the crimes described in it. She can't claim both, that she never did these things A and D, that she was forced to confess to them. She was right. Veronica's legal strategy contained a fundamental contradiction that a skilled prosecutor could exploit. Jonathan, I said, picking up my phone to call my attorney, I need you to arrange a meeting with the district attorney. And David, call that reporter back. Tell them we'll give them an exclusive interview, but only if they agree to air it unedited and in full. As I watched David make the call and Patricia carefully tend to a delicate orchid bloom, I realized that this battle was far from over. Veronica had chosen to fight, to drag our family through a public scandal rather than accept the consequences of her actions. But she'd made one critical miscalculation. She thought that by attacking us publicly, she could intimidate us into backing down. Instead, she'd given us the opportunity to expose her lies to everyone, to show the world exactly who she really was. The war Veronica had declared was about to become very public, and this time I intended to win it decisively. The press conference was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at the Willowbrook Heights Community Center, giving us 3 days to prepare our case for public scrutiny. Jonathan had insisted on controlling every aspect of the presentation, from the order of speakers to the specific evidence we would display. He'd also arranged for District Attorney Sarah Chen to attend, lending official weight to our response. Remember, Jonathan coached us during our final preparation session, we're not here to attack Mrs. Fletcher personally. We're here to present facts and let the evidence speak for itself. The moment we appear vindictive or emotional, we lose credibility. David sat across from me at my dining room table, which was covered with documents, photographs, and transcripts that told the story of Veronica's crimes. He'd taken 3 days off work to help prepare, and I could see the toll this was taking on him. The dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way he flinched every time his phone buzzed with another threatening message from Veronica. What if no one believes us? He asked quietly. What if Blackstone has already convinced people that we're the villains in this story? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, I replied, though I shared his concern. Veronica's media campaign had been devastatingly effective. The local news had run her interview 3 times, complete with tearful claims about being, quote, destroyed by a family who couldn't accept their son's happiness. Social media was buzzing with comments from people who'd never met any of us but had strong opinions about controlling mothers-in-law and innocent wives. Patricia Morrison had become an unexpected ally in our media strategy. As someone with no family connection to either side, her testimony carried particular weight. She'd agreed to speak about what she'd witnessed during the fraudulent sale process, providing the perspective of a neutral third party who'd been caught in Veronica's web of lies. There's something else you should know, Jonathan said, consulting his notes. Blackstone held his own press conference this morning. Mrs. Fletcher appeared with a psychiatrist who claims she was suffering from severe anxiety and depression during the time period in question, making her vulnerable to coercion and unable to think clearly. Of course she did, I said with bitter resignation. Let me guess. Her mental health issues were caused by the stress of dealing with her difficult mother-in-law. Actually, that's exactly what Dr. Pemberton claimed. He says Mrs. Fletcher was so traumatized by what he called, quote, sustained emotional abuse from you, that she developed a dissociative disorder, causing her to act in ways that were completely out of character. David slammed his hand on the table, making the coffee cups rattle. That's complete bullshit, and anyone who knew Mom before Veronica came along can prove it. Which is why I've arranged for character witnesses, Jonathan replied calmly. Your neighbors, family friends, colleagues from Mrs. Fairmont's volunteer work, people who can testify to her character and her relationship with you before Mrs. Fletcher entered the picture. At 4 o'clock sharp, we arrived at the community center to find a packed room. Local reporters, community members, and what appeared to be several of Veronica's supporters had filled every available seat. I spotted Rebecca Hartley near the front, flanked by Detective Williams and Dr. Martinez. Their presence gave me courage. Veronica and her attorney sat in the back row, and I was shocked by her appearance. Gone was the polished, confident woman who'd destroyed my family with such calculated precision. This version of Veronica looked fragile and defeated, wearing a simple black dress and minimal makeup that made her appear years older. It was clearly a carefully crafted image designed to evoke sympathy. Jonathan began our presentation with a methodical review of the timeline, supported by hospital records, police reports, and security footage. He explained how Mrs. Fletcher had used forged power of attorney documents to attempt the sale of a $2.1 million property, while the rightful owner was unconscious and recovering from surgery. These are not the actions of someone suffering from mental illness, he stated firmly. These are the calculated crimes of someone who saw an opportunity to commit fraud and took it. When it was my turn to speak, I walked slowly to the podium, still favoring my recovering back but determined to appear strong. The room fell silent as I looked out at the crowd of faces. Some sympathetic, others skeptical, a few openly hostile. 3 weeks ago, I began. I went into surgery trusting that my family would protect what I couldn't protect myself. Instead, I woke up to discover that someone I'd welcomed into my home, someone I'd tried to love as a daughter, had betrayed that trust in the most devastating way possible. I explained how Veronica had systematically isolated David from his family, deleted my contact information from his phone, and convinced him that his mother was manipulative and controlling. I described the 3 years of gradual erosion of our relationship, the subtle criticisms and not-so-subtle suggestions that had slowly poisoned my son against me. But the most painful part, I continued, wasn't the financial fraud or even the forged documents. It was watching someone systematically destroy the relationship between a mother and son, using love itself as a weapon. When David took the podium, his voice was shaky but determined. I want everyone in this room to understand something, he said. My mother didn't manipulate me into seeing the truth about my wife. The evidence did that. The forged documents, the security footage, the confession that Veronica signed. These aren't products of family manipulation, they're proof of criminal behavior. He detailed how he'd discovered his mother's phone number deleted from his contacts, how he'd found charges on his credit card for expenses he'd never authorized, how Veronica had scheduled antique appraisals for family heirlooms without his knowledge. The woman sitting in the back of this room, David said, his voice growing stronger, didn't just commit fraud against my mother. She committed fraud against me, forging my signature and using my name to legitimize her crimes. She turned me into an unwitting accomplice in stealing from my own family. Patricia Morrison's testimony was perhaps the most compelling. As a neutral observer with no personal stake in the outcome, her account of Veronica's behavior during the sale process carried significant weight. She described Veronica's inappropriate excitement about the transaction, her eagerness to rush the closing, and her obvious lack of genuine concern for the supposed family situation that necessitated the sale. In 30 years of dealing with real estate transactions, Patricia concluded, I've never encountered someone who seemed less like a grieving family member making a difficult decision. Mrs. Fletcher acted like someone celebrating a personal victory, not someone helping an incapacitated relative. The questions from reporters were pointed and sometimes hostile. Several asked why I'd chosen to handle the matter privately rather than involving law enforcement immediately. Others questioned whether the confession had been obtained through improper pressure. But the most challenging question came from a reporter who was clearly sympathetic to Veronica's narrative. Mrs. Fairmont, isn't it true that you've had a difficult relationship with your daughter-in-law from the beginning? Isn't it possible that your dislike of her colored your interpretation of events? I took a deep breath before answering. I didn't like Mrs. Fletcher, that's true. But not because she wasn't good enough for my son, and not because I wanted to control his life. I didn't like her because I could see that she was manipulative, calculating, and ultimately destructive to my family. Unfortunately, the events of the past month have proven that my instincts were correct. As the press conference concluded, I noticed Veronica whispering urgently to her attorney. Her carefully constructed image of wounded innocence was cracking under the weight of documented evidence and credible testimony. But I knew this wasn't over. Veronica had invested too much in her lies to give up now. The real test would come when this reached the courtroom, where her expensive attorney would try to turn documented facts into reasonable doubt. As we packed up our evidence and prepared to leave, David took my arm gently. Mom, whatever happens next, I want you to know that I'm proud of how you handled this. You gave her every opportunity to do the right thing, and when she chose to fight instead, you fought back with truth and dignity. I looked back at Veronica, who was surrounded by her supporters but looked more isolated than ever. She'd gambled everything on a strategy of lies and manipulation, and now she was facing the consequences. The war she'd declared was far from over. But today, we'd won an important battle. 6 months after that pivotal press conference, I stood in the conservatory watching Patricia Morrison carefully transplant a rare Victorian orchid that had finally bloomed after months of patient cultivation. The morning sun streamed through the restored glass panels, casting rainbow patterns across the lush green space that had become a symbol of renewal and healing. It's magnificent, Patricia said, stepping back to admire the delicate white and purple blooms. Your great-grandmother would be so proud to see her collection not just surviving but thriving again. The legal proceedings had concluded 3 weeks earlier with a plea agreement that satisfied justice while avoiding a lengthy trial. Faced with overwhelming evidence and dwindling public support, Veronica had finally accepted responsibility for her crimes. She pleaded guilty to fraud, forgery, and attempted grand larceny, receiving a suspended sentence of 2 years in prison, contingent on paying full restitution, completing community service, and maintaining no contact with our family. Mitchell Blackstone had withdrawn from the case after the press conference, reportedly telling colleagues that his client had provided him with incomplete information about the circumstances of her confession. Without her high-powered attorney, Veronica's legal options had quickly evaporated. The morning news said she's moving to Oregon, David mentioned as he joined us in the conservatory, carrying a tray of coffee and Patricia's favorite lemon scones. Apparently, she has a cousin there who offered her a fresh start. I felt no satisfaction in Veronica's exile, only relief that she was finally accepting the consequences of her actions and moving forward with her life. The woman who had tried to destroy my family was no longer my problem to solve. How are the divorce proceedings going? Patricia asked gently, knowing this remained a painful topic for David. Finalized last week, David replied, settling into one of the wicker chairs we'd placed among the orchid tables. Since she had no legitimate claim to any marital assets due to her criminal activities, it was surprisingly straightforward. I kept the apartment, she kept her car, and we both walked away with our separate debts. The transformation in David over these past months had been remarkable to witness. The uncertain, manipulated man who'd signed those forged documents was gone, replaced by someone who'd rediscovered his own values and strength. He'd started teaching computer science at the local community college in January and spoke about his students with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in him for years. "I have news," he announced, producing an official-looking letter from his jacket pocket. The Historical Society approved our application for a heritage preservation grant. We're getting $75,000 to restore the original hardwood floors and repair the stained glass windows in the main hall. I felt tears spring to my eyes as I took the letter and read the formal notification. When Thomas and I had first applied for historical designation years ago, I dreamed of fully restoring the house to its original grandeur. Now, thanks to the increased value from the National Historic Registry listing, that dream was becoming reality. "There's something else," David continued, his tone becoming more serious. "I got a call from Rebecca Hartley yesterday. She wanted to let us know that Dr. and Mrs. Morrison are expecting their first grandchild, and their daughter is planning to move to Willowbrook Heights to be closer to them." Patricia beamed at this news. "James will be over the moon. He's been talking about teaching a grandchild to fish in our pond." "It's funny how things work out," I mused. If Veronica's fraud hadn't been discovered, the Morrisons never would have found their perfect home, Patricia and I never would have become friends, and this conservatory might still be dying from neglect. "Sometimes the worst things that happen to us clear the path for the best things," Patricia agreed, gently misting a cluster of delicate blooms. "Your family is stronger now than it was before all this happened." She was right. The crisis had forced David and me to confront uncomfortable truths about how our relationship had deteriorated, but it had also given us the opportunity to rebuild it on a foundation of complete honesty and mutual respect. We'd started new traditions: Sunday morning gardening sessions, weekly cooking experiments in the kitchen, monthly trips to visit the historical sites that had shaped our family's story. "I've been thinking about something," David said, setting down his coffee cup. "What would you say to the idea of opening the house for historical tours once the restoration is complete? Nothing too intrusive, maybe once a month. But it seems like a shame to keep all this history hidden when people could learn from it." The idea filled me with unexpected excitement. "Your great-grandfather always said this house was meant to be shared, not hoarded. He used to host community gatherings in the ballroom during the holidays." "We could establish a small foundation," Patricia suggested enthusiastically. "Use the tour proceeds to fund local historical preservation projects. It would ensure the house stays in your family while serving the broader community." As we discussed the possibilities, my phone rang with a call from Jonathan Whitmore. I answered, curious about what legal matter might require attention now that all our major issues had been resolved. "Eleanor, I have some interesting news," he said. "I just received a call from the State Attorney General's office. Apparently, Mrs. Fletcher's case has led to a broader investigation into fraudulent power of attorney abuse. They want to use your situation as a case study for training law enforcement officers to recognize similar scams." "What does that involve?" "Basically, they'd like you and David to participate in a documentary that would be used for educational purposes. It would help protect other families from experiencing what you went through." I looked at David, who had overheard enough of the conversation to understand the request. He nodded encouragingly. "Jonathan, tell them we'd be honored to help. If our experience can prevent even one family from going through this nightmare, it would give meaning to everything we've endured." After hanging up, I sat quietly among the blooming orchids, reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd awakened from surgery to discover that my world was being stolen from me by someone I'd trusted. I'd felt helpless, betrayed, and utterly alone. Today, surrounded by family and friends in the conservatory that symbolized 4 generations of love and perseverance, I understood that Veronica's greatest miscalculation hadn't been underestimating the legal system or overlooking the security cameras. Her biggest mistake had been believing that love could be destroyed by lies, that family bonds could be severed by manipulation, that a legacy built over a century could be erased with forged documents. She'd been wrong about all of it. "David," I said, watching him help Patricia stake a climbing orchid that was reaching toward the sunlight, "I want you to know that everything your father and I hoped you would become, you've become. Not because of the crisis we faced, but because of how you chose to face it." He looked up from the orchid with tears in his eyes. "Mom, I spent 3 years thinking I needed to choose between my family and my future. I never realized that my family was my future." As the afternoon sun filled the conservatory with golden light, I knew that our story was far from over. There would be new challenges, new joys, new generations to nurture and protect. But whatever came next, we would face it together, strengthened by the knowledge that the bonds connecting us were unbreakable. The Fairmont legacy wasn't just about the house or the antiques or the money. It was about the understanding that family means standing together when the world tries to tear you apart, that love means protecting what matters most, and that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from refusing to let them define who you are. Veronica had tried to steal our past. Instead, she'd given us an even stronger future. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.